So I want to start with just a little bit of background on flow. Again, this is the part that might be remedial for some, but I think it's good just to cover and establish a basis. So we'll cover a few items here and then kind of move over into the product and look at what some of these workflows look like. So to start with, a really important concept in flow export and collection and analysis that may often get overlooked, but if you've ever gone through a configuration, especially on a Cisco device where they're very verbose and you have access to all the low-level parameters, this is going to be something you've bumped into or might be familiar with. And that's really the concept of time granularity and the flow observations themselves. So in a traditional flow cache, these are governed by active and inactive cache timeouts. So in this kind of little graphic here, if you imagine times moving to the right, and this is a continuous connection that was established over, say, a router, and this is an entry in its flow cache. If that connection is alive for 150 seconds on a 60-second active timeout, basically what we're going to get is the first minute will be considered a block of information. That active timeout, the conversation's active, so after 60 seconds, we're going to time out that entry, even though it's still active. As soon as an active timeout happens, immediately a new entry is put in the cache for the next minute because we know that conversation hasn't stopped yet. So between 0 and 60, we get a flow. Between 60 and 120, we get a flow. Between 120 and 150, the flow stops. And then 15 seconds later, at 175 seconds, our inactive timeout happens. So effectively, the inactive timeout is a time buffer that allows the conversation to resume and still be considered the same connection, or ideally find kind of our termination point and send out the final update of data about, in this case, the last 30 seconds that happened, since there wasn't a full minute for the active cache timeout. Where this is a really important concept to consider is this will give us to the minute granularity of the state of these flows, and ultimately allow us to report on sections of time that are in the middle of conversations. So where we can report independently from the start or the conclusion of a conversation. We don't necessarily need to go to the conclusion record and then use like the time bounds that were provided by the exporter to figure out when this was occurring. Instead, we get updates in real time, minute by minute. We get all of our aggregates summarized, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about the various flow record types and templating. But we get a summary of what was happening at that exact instant in time. So when we go to drill into a report, we'll see later on, we can actually see exactly that moment as opposed to having to infer anything about it from aggregated data that was supplied around that time. This same idea holds up for firewall events, another component we'll look at in the tool in a moment. So in the case of firewall events, we do still have active and inactive cache timeouts, but we also have NSEL or network secure event logging, which will give us some insight into the events that are happening on the firewall around the inspection queues that are actually looking at the traffic and enforcing your policies, all the way through denials. If you just want quick insight into what is your firewall blocking at the moment, just a quick check to see is this our application problem? Is the firewall's just not allowing the traffic through at all? And ultimately, the delete event when the inspection queue for that traffic is terminated by your firewall and the final kind of update about what happened is issued. So again, that conversation starts, it's created and slotted into the inspection queue on the device. Every active cache timeout period of time, normally 60 seconds, should be 60 seconds on our platform at least. You'll get an update, which will give you all of the deltas. So you can think packet counts, byte counts for the last minute of that open and active conversation over the firewall. And then ultimately, similar to our inactive timeout in a normal flow cache, when the conversation concludes, an inactive timer will expire, and then ultimately we'll get a delete event representing that conversation has both expired from a reporting standpoint for us, and it's no longer in the inspection queue of the firewall. So it actually gives you a great way, if you're facing CPU issues on a very busy firewall, to get some insight into kind of what actions is it taking, when are those bursts in activity. Maybe there's lots of long-running conversations, but they all start at the same time, so you can get a good idea as to when kind of the inspection queue is being really hammered for new conversations versus just maintaining things that are open and active. So really two timing metrics to keep in mind as we move forward, the active and inactive timeouts, and then ultimately with firewalls, kind of the event-driven timeout activities that will happen.